Vision, Russia Islamic World, the head of Tatarstan, Rustam Minikhanov, will report about the results of the work of the group in 2024 and prospects of further activities in line with its next meeting under the slogan "The Experience of Russia and the Countries of Islamic World in the Field of Youth Policy, Common Challenges and Activities." I would like to remind you that it will be held on the 15th and 16th of May in Kazan on the sidelines of International Economic Forum, Russia Islamic World, Kazan Forum 2025. This event, the Kazan Forum, will be held between 13th and 18th of May. This forum will bring together representatives of federal and regional authorities, Russian religious associations, as well as academia and business community and mass media. On the 21st of April, the minister will meet the Deputy Prime Minister of Laos, who will be in our country with a working visit. The ministers will plan the state and the prospects of overall advancement of bilateral relations, to exchange opinions on the ways to deepen the political dialogue, expand trade and economic cooperation, cultural and educational problems. And in the period between 22 and 23rd of April, our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will visit Uzbekistan, where he will meet the President of Uzbekistan and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the main focus will be rendered to further advancement of a comprehensive bilateral interaction, and following the May 2024 state visit of our President to Uzbekistan. With due account of shared views and policies, the ministers will discuss of mutual interest relevant international issues, regional security, interaction on the CIS, SCO, and Central Asia and Russia. On the agenda are also the processes of Eurasian integration with the due taking into account the status of observers of Uzbekistan in EEU. One of the important topics of negotiations will be preparations to the 80th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War. The minister will visit the memorial site, Park of Victory, in Tashkent. And among key events of the program, Sergei Lavrov will address to the faculty and students of the University of World Economy and Diplomacy to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan. The visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia is expected to boost further range of the Russia-Uzbek relations, joint work, and the coordinating role of our foreign ministers in this area. Let us switch to the relevant international issue, the situation in Ukraine. Once again, we can state non-compliance of the Kiev on the 30-day ceasefire to attack the energy infrastructure. As you know, and you see it from the mass media, the Kiev regime continues to openly ignore the agreed between the President of Russia and the United States, and supported, by the way, by Zelensky, a 30-day ceasefire on attacks on energy infrastructures. Almost on a daily basis, the Ukrainian army make drones on energy infrastructure. Since they declared the so-called energy truce, about 80 attacks were, on behalf of the Kiev regime, fixed. On the night, just a few examples, on the night from the 8th and 9th April, the Ukrainian army used 8 drones to attack the Koronevsky settlement area and energy infrastructure compressor station Korenevskaya, and which supplies gas of the export pipeline, Turkish pipeline, with a capacity of 31.5 billion cubic meters per year. And all the drones were intercepted. But what is important is fact, because it was a deliberate attack of the Kiev regime on the fuel and energy complex. On the 9th of April, 2 Ukrainian drones attacked a gas distribution station, Timryuk, which provides gas to the city and Port Timryuk. All drones were intercepted. On the night between 10 and 14th April, the drones broke the wires, which led to energy cuts in Belgorod, Bryansk, Zaporizhia, Kursk, and Khersonsk regions, as well as in the Krasnodar region and the LPR. And the goals of these drones were power converters, electrical substations, and this is an energy infrastructure. An overhead line in the railway station Vasurinske of the North Caucasian Railroad was damaged, as well as the distribution low-pressure steel pipeline, Gazprom, gas distribution, Belgorod. This is, I would like to reiterate, just a few examples. We have already submitted all this information to the international organizations as well as to the Americans. We'll continue to do so. As for the crimes of the Kiev regime, they disseminate not only to the fuel and energy complex. The Ukrainians continue to exterminate the Russian population, not daily, but even every hour. Just a few examples. We need to cite such examples for those who believe or expect or maybe pose questions on whether what should be done to settle the situation in Ukraine. Maybe stop supporting the Kiev regime, which in its terrorist hype commits all these crimes. On the 9th of April, the munition blow claimed lives of 2 young people, 11 and 14 youngsters. The drone attacked the civilian car in Gorlovka and the residential district in Selidovo on the 10th and 14th April, injuring 2 civilians, and a woman on the 13th of April in the Alexandrova settlement. The same day, the HIMARS attacked the Kiev district of Donetsk, damaging some civilian infrastructure, including boarding school and 2 higher institutions. On the 14th of April, the drones in the settlements of Buzhevka and Giry in Zoltarovka, the Kursk region, claimed lives of 5 civilians. In the Belgorodsk region, between April 12 and 14, the Ukrainian drones killed truck driver and injuring at least 5 civilians. On the 13th of April, the Ukrainian army shelled with the NATO Vampire MLRS the residential areas of Kamenka, Dneprovskaya region, Tokmak of the Zaporozhsky region. 3 houses were destroyed. The building of administration was damaged, but there were no victims, happily. But this strike was deliberately made on civilian infrastructure. And to put it most simple, on residential areas. On the night of the 15th of April, the Ukrainian Nazis made a suicide drone attack against civilians of Kursk and its outskirts. The strikes were deliberately made on residential areas and social infrastructure. The authorities reported about 24 multiple-story buildings, 3 of them damaged. Out of 9 victims, 6 were taken to hospital and 1 elderly woman died. One of the strikes was made deliberately on the ambulance station, on all those who should render and who should help and treat the wounded. 11 ambulance cars were under this attack and were damaged. All these drones were directed without any deliberate targets. It was made deliberately. All this operation was guided. It was a deliberately and well-thought operation as a terrorist act against the medical personnel. Now I have a question to the international organizations and to the UN Secretary General, to his official representative. and numerous rapporteurs and to the UN agencies who deal, for example, with maternal issues and childhood, protection of socially unprotected people, of medical services, and security of medical staff. Where are your statements? Where are your concerns, your press releases, or at least some sympathy at the briefings or press conferences? There's no reaction at all. You are badly fulfilling your duties. All these atrocities are being investigated by the Russian law enforcement authorities. In particular, the crimes against the citizens of the Kursk region. The investigative committee continues to investigate into the facts of atrocities by Ukraine and, by the way, by foreign mercenaries of the citizens of Kursk region. In particular, those who survived from the settlement Goeva reported 6 Russians were shot dead during their evacuation. Bombs were released on residential buildings. There was grand looting among Ukrainian army. There were evidences that the Nazi threatened, and this information is a very sensitive one, threatened to rape a mother in the settlement Kazachye Loknya in the eyes of her minor children. Now the circumstances of the death of the 9 citizens of Makhnovka region are being identified. There were found gunshot wounds on the corpses. One of the died was an elderly woman who was just shot in the head. This is just a small part of all the atrocities. All those who are involved in these war crimes will be identified and brought to justice. And let's switch on another tool, a staging of the Kiev regime. As you remember, over the last days, the so-called collective West raised the public outrage on the 13th of April by the Russian army, a high-precision strike with demolition rockets at a restaurant Magellan, where a meeting of Ukrainian command with participation of the Western instructors took place in Sumy city. All these Western media hyped on this poorly staged propagandistic fake, on the alleged rocket attack who killed women and children. We've made several comments on this topic, but I think that this day and these things must be talked a lot about so that everyone knew about the crimes of the Kiev regime. As we've said, new facts are being revealed that confirm that it was a deliberate staging. The Ukrainian internet is being filled with memoirs on this occasion, on the military who were eliminated and dead on the 13th of April in Sumy. The local authorities unwillingly but started to recognize the truth. The mayor of Konotop, Artyom Semenyukhin, blamed the head of the Sumsk region military administration, Vladimir Artyukh, that he organized a gathering of the Ukrainian army, engaging women and children to this event in order to use them as a human shield. Even Zelensky henchman, the deputy of the Verkhovna Rada, Madam Bezuglaya, publicly required to figure out who shaped and staged this and who ordered to use the women and children as a human shield for this event to cover the military gathering. Why this happens? It's just simply because that the citizens of Ukraine, irrespective of their political views, become to understand that they were just used, that the person who promised to bring peace to them brought slaughter and extermination. He retained his power not by democratic means, but sacrificing civilians of his own country. The facts prove, and Zelensky was compelled to fire the head of the Sumsky military administration, Mr. Artyukh, de facto reaffirming the charges. The leader of the junta tried to shift the blame on this another war crime against the citizens of Ukraine. I would like to remind Mr. Zelensky, who decided to shift the blame on the head of the military administration, Mr. Artyukh, his words, his same words. He said a couple of years ago that he's not a bad guy, he's not a fool. Then he is to blame. Whether Zelensky knows what's being happening in all these dismissals, memoirs of military soldiers, the human shields, whether Antonio Guterres knows about all these events, because just the next day following the attack, and the goals and targets were legitimate, was, and I quote, alarmed by the Sunday missile attack of Russia on Suma, and he blamed our country, and I quote, on attacking civilians. And right now, when the facts are revealed, equally as the situation in Bucha, when almost in 3 years there was no chance to release the list of all those dead, allegedly dead there. Right now, when there are new facts that this was a staging, I refer to all these stories of the Kiev regime about deliberate strikes of Russia on civilian infrastructure, on the children and women, when it became obvious and clear, maybe anyone in the Secretariat of the UN can find and be courageous enough to tell the truth.
Maybe they'll find the strength to speak up about this. When the AFU attacked peaceful civilians on the Crimean Breach, in the Moscow region and the St. Petersburg, the terrorists of the Security Service Ukraine blow up Russian journalists, where the UAVs attacked the Moscow Kremlin, when the AFU punitive squad members committed genocide and mass killings in the Kursk region and buried elderly people alive in Ruskoye Porechnoye, all those European peacekeepers were silent. The UN Secretariat just remember it, they diplomatically called for peace. Now when the gathering of militants was destroyed, everyone in unison started blaming Russia. And when they found out that the Kiev regime, it was the Kiev regime, the local Ukrainian military administration, made up this human shield to protect this gathering, everybody just lost their minds. That's how the Kiev regime tried to shield the ghouls with children, and they did it deliberately. And now all the curators and sponsors are trying to cover it up. We also noted the pathetic statements, exclamations, those screams, lamentations, that this strike was conducted on Palm Sunday during a holy day for all Christians, and so on and so forth. Only now the international minority has suddenly become concerned with the situation in Ukraine, with the Orthodox Christians, with the holy sites, only with the Palm Sunday on 2025. And before that, what was happening before that? There have been thousands of cases testifying to the fact that the modern Ukrainian neo-Nazis don't have anything left. don't they have anything left holy in them. I would like to develop on the one more aspect, relations of Ukrainian banderites with the church. We are weekly, during our briefing, pointing attention of the public and the international organizations, and we are talking about this every day, how the neo-Nazis are damaging and desecrating temples, how they are persecuting clergymen, desecrating holy sites and remains of saints. And what about the West, which has suddenly remembered about the Palm Sunday, the holiday for all Orthodox parishioners? Did they only just feel this attack against the sentiments of religious people? No, they've just been criminally silent during all those years. The relevant human rights institutions and mechanisms are also silent. The High Commissioner's Office on Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights regarding freedom of religion and convictions, the ODHR and the personal representative of the current chairperson of the OSCE on fighting intolerance and discrimination are all silent. Such appeasement of Kiev neo-Nazis who are capturing Orthodox temples, who are persecuting the parishioners up to being physically, up to physical actions against them, attacking clergymen, and this is all being ignored by the West. The Russian side is gathering facts and publishing the corresponding reports. There have been 2 such reports on the illegal actions of the Kiev regime in regards to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its clergymen and parishioners. This report was published by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia in July 2023. And in January 2025, we had the second such report, and the links will be provided in the text version of today's briefing. The reports are available in English language. They have been shared with international organizations. I haven't seen any reaction, any true reaction of international institutions to those reports. Perhaps everyone who have only just remembered the Palm Sunday occasion could find a couple hours to familiarize themselves with those reports. They have been written precisely on the basis of facts. All those crimes of neo-Nazis will be investigated and prosecuted. The Russian courts are continuing to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes and other types of crimes. The commander of an engineering and sapper detachment of the AFU Marine detachment, Oleg Zavaletsky, was sentenced to 24.5 years for massacring a civilian in March 2022. In absentia, we sentenced the Ukrainian citizen Todor Panovsky. In January 2019, he attacked the Consul General of Russia in Odessa by throwing 5 flares, smoke flares, and a can with paint. He's been sentenced to 8 years in prison. An international search has been declared. Also, Brazilian and Finnish mercenaries fighting for the AFU have been sentenced to 7 and 14 years respectively. The Georgian legionary Georgy Goglidze was sentenced to 9 years. He has been captured in November 2023 in the territory of LPR. A militant from the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the AFU, Boris Nikolenko, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was previously captured by the Russian forces. And during the illegal invasion in the Crux region, he tried to scare the locals. He prevented the evacuation, opened fire upon civilians and Russian servicemen. We will continue this work on and on. And my favorite meme is the coalition of the willing, and it's another gathering in Brussels, which happened on April 10th. However, there has been no breakthrough with the coalition of the willing. perhaps they're not as willing as they declare to be. Despite all efforts, Paris and London still can't reach unity for the support of the promoted their mindless plan of placing a multinational peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine, numbering in its midst the detachments of some NATO countries. According to information of the media, this escapade, which is wrought with a direct confrontation with Russia, is perhaps only attractive to such Russophobic countries as the Baltic states are. Some states perhaps are not even aware of what is being done by those who are in power in the countries. The majority of the coalition members perhaps doubt the realistic outcomes of this military intervention without the support of the United States, and Washington, according to their recent statements, is not really willing to get dragged into such escapades of their allies, because they clearly understand what this could lead to. And now on the Rammstein format, there's been a 27th meeting of the Rammstein format in the headquarters of NATO in Brussels under the British and German chairmanship. This 27th meeting of the contact group on the defense cooperation with Ukraine in the format of Rammstein for the first time happened without the personal presence of the head of the Pentagon. Zelensky joined the meeting through video link, and there's been no new novel decisions taken. The FU's promised 21 billion euros. This number was earlier mentioned in the NATO statements. The London was active in announcing a new package of aid numbering 350 million pounds sterling, including hundreds of thousands UAVs, the radio stations, etc. In 2025, the UK is planning to spend 4.5 billion pounds to aid Kiev. Berlin is trying to catch up to them. They have shipped 30 additional missiles for Patriot missile systems this year, but Berlin is hesitant to ship the missile platforms themselves. Instead of that, they are ready to ship another Iris-T missile complexes and ship armored vehicles, tanks, munitions, etc. A total of 3 billion euros is prepared to be given to Ukraine. And where will they get the money from? Of course, from the taxpayers' pocket, who are, even without that, are oppressed by the senseless decisions of the both current and former German authorities. The German co-chairs claimed the creation of another meme in preparation, the coalition of possibilities or opportunities. And, it's like a funny joke. There is a coalition of the willing, and there is a coalition of opportunity. This time it concerns the radio combat measures. This coalition will be reuniting 11 countries to ensure the reliability of communication systems in Ukraine and separation of communications of Russian detachment and the drone protection. This gathering confirmed once again that the Europeans are ready to continue aid to the Kiev regime, but there's some kind of detachment from the process. There's some hesitancy being felt, and they are clearly unable to act without referring to the United States. They are clearly unable to act independently because they are not ready to be the singular ones responsible for the continuation of the conflict. And also, we have noted the German report regarding the significant negatives of the weapons they have supplied. The deputy military attaché with the German embassy in Kiev issued a report regarding the analysis of some significant lacks in the weapons and munitions shipped by Berlin to the AFU. Among the key problems, he mentions the difficulty in use, frequent breakdowns, difficult maintenance, the high cost and lack of munitions, lack of spare parts, etc. At the current stage, we see that not a single example of heavy equipment provided by Germany is not completely applicable, completely useful to be actively utilized in during intensive combat. Such facts give us a reason to doubt Berlin's capability to be one of the most reliable suppliers of Ukraine when it comes to arms and munitions. And that's the very country that, as I already mentioned, participates in the Ramstein format, is making up new formats like the Coalition of Opportunity, is building up some defensive offensive alliances, etc. All those doubts will only get stronger if you remember that the former head of the Ministry of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, publicly lamented the deficit of their own arms stockpiles due to the incessant supplies to Kiev regime. Now, on the UK's involvement in the conflict, we noted the publication by the Times issued on April 11th, confirming the high measure of Britain's involvement in the conflict of Ukraine. It mentions that in February 22, dozens of UK servicemen were sent to Kiev to instruct the AFU militants to use anti-tank complexes supplied to London. In May 2023, after the storm shadows were given to Kiev, the British servicemen were transported in secret to Ukraine to help equip planes with those missiles and train Ukrainians to use them. After the failed counteroffensive in 2023, which was named after the then Minister of Defense of the UK, Ben Wallace, we see that this clearly testifies to the fact who was really responsible for the development of military planning and the conducting military operations of Kiev. That's another proof that, of course, we're not talking about just the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We're talking about a hybrid war of the collective West, the NATO countries, the Western minority against our country through Ukraine. I wanted to remind everyone of the events that happened 11 years ago, because 11 years ago, on 13th February 2014, the Council of National Security of Ukraine adopted a decision on urgent measures to overcome terrorist threats and to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which was put into force the very next day by the order of the interim president Alexander Turchinov. That was the date where the notorious anti-terrorist operation began. They call it an anti-terrorist operation, but in essence, they just started the civil war on that day. The neo-Nazi regime started fighting their own compatriots, then compatriots in Donbas, who did not accept the government of victors who have captured power, who have gained power in Kiev as a result of a bloody putsch in Kiev in February that year, and who have unceremoniously started to eradicate dissent and did the same thing as their predecessors 80 years ago. They started to eradicate all those who couldn't be called first-class citizens. Then this name, anti-terrorist operation, was used exclusively to present the Kiev regime as the victim of the situation. However, by declaring the anti-terrorist operation, Kiev decided to start a policy of state terrorism. Besides the constant shellings and bombardments of Donbas, just remember, the region was completely blockaded from the economic, financial, transport, and and water standpoint. Since December 2014, the government of Ukraine stopped paying all social dues and transactions to the populations, including pensions and managing banking accounts of the population and the enterprises in the region. They disconnected water supply of cities and villages. And throughout all those years, Russia constantly tried to attract the attention of international public to that, not due to the political reasons, because Russia always supplied humanitarian assistance to the region daily. Remember how they perceived it in the West? I remember it very well. The large convoys of white trucks who started supplying everything that was helping save the civilian population in Donbas, so the food and medicine and generators to help them power the supply. And the West called it, I remember it very well, they called it an invasion. Then they tried to backtrack, but it was too late for that, because everyone finally understood that this was another fake news by the Western media. They came up with different excuses that those trucks contain tanks, munitions, even armed personnel. And this wouldn't be necessary if the Kiev regime didn't introduce the blockade that we mentioned, that was regularly mentioned, including today. Today, we are continuing to supply humanitarian aid, and we tried to attract the attention of the international community to what's happening in Donbas. We talked that the Kiev regime was massacring the ethnic Russians and other locals in the region. Yes, we call things what they are. We noted that accusing Donbas of terrorism was a complete falsification. On 31st of January 2024, this was confirmed by the International Court of Justice, which refused to accept DPR and OPR as terrorist organizations and Russia as a sponsor of terrorism. The UN, the ICJ rejected this label of terrorist organization and terrorist sponsor. This verdict disproved the main argument of Kiev, which was used to justify the war they unleashed against the peaceful population, and they confirmed that all actions of Kiev against Donbas were initially based on complete lies.
Annually, on the 14th of April, our people mourn the victims of the Ukrainian aggression. We are grateful to all those who continue today to fight with the neo-Nazi criminals who came to our land and defend people and strives for peaceful skies. All the facts, there are a lot of them, besides just examples, once again reaffirm the relevance of the special military operation to denazify, demilitarize the Ukraine and eliminate threats coming from its territory. As our leaders said, it will be implemented. By the way, we can stop on the international response. Once again, we've made it on numerous occasions, but I would like to reiterate and bring your attention that the High Commissioner of the United Nations on Human Rights behaves incompatible with his mandate. He distances himself from the impartiality principle enshrined in his mandate and by the UN General Assembly 41.148. The double standards have become the distinct feature of the work of his office. It clearly ignores systemic, flagrant human rights violations in the Western states and their allies. And the response of the UN officials are very quick in their response to false facts in the unwanted to the West states. And a striking illustration to such policy is the approaches of the Kiev regime to assess the situation which stays beyond the High Commissioner's interests. And here we see multiple discrimination of the Russian language in all the areas. The Russian language is prohibited in all the areas of life in Ukraine, and anyone who speaks the language gets great fines, is under administrative prosecution, receives threats up to physical violence. This civil rights activist, Volker Türk, is not concerned about the situation with the freedom of speech and association in Ukraine, where political and public space was de facto cleansed from opposition parties, mass media, and public society. There is no word of condemnation on behalf of the High Commissioner in violation of the right to the religion due to the extermination war unleashed by Zelensky, the war against the Orthodox Ukrainian Church, which comes along with arson attacks and expropriation of assets. We are seeing how they attack the temples, intimidate the clergies, and warn with violence against the clergy and the parishioners. The long-standing ignorance by the UN Commission of systematic and flagrant violation of Zelensky of the fundamental human rights, the mayhem of neo-Nazism in Ukraine led to that the Kiev junta simply violates the norms of international humanitarian law. The combatants of the Ukrainian armed forces take hostages among civilians and use them as human shield, shell them, torture, kill the Russian prisoners of war and civilians. And we talk a lot about the atrocities which were revealed recently about the Ukrainian neo-Nazi against the citizens of Selidovo and DPR in the Kursk region, and all those who have seen the footages live another way. And I talked with our law enforcement authorities, and they are just thrilled and terrified by the video footage. Other territories under the Ukrainian control exemplify other dysfunctions of the office and this tool and instrument of the United Nations. Under Volker Türk, something goes wrong. It's dysfunctioning right now. I believe there will be no response from the High Commissioner to the death of the Russian journalists. And there are a lot of examples of such deaths due to the attacks of Ukraine in June 2024 and in March 2025, when they were blown in civilian cities. The High Commission also cynically ignores the state policy in the Baltic states to discriminate on national, ethnic, racial, religious, and language grounds. I would like to remind you, in these countries, under flimsy formalities, the government continues to exterminate, to expel ethnic Russians. The Russians who consider this country as their motherland, maybe someone was born there, spent the whole life, who worked for the benefit and for the well-being of the country, who had families, who raised children and grandchildren. And the last example of such denial of truth, on behalf of Volker Türk, this is a legislative initiative to ban the Estonian Orthodox Church under a bizarre pretext, the threat to national security. And that's how the Estonian Street Orthodox Church, under connivance of the Office of the Human Rights, such a law that extinguishes the believers, was adopted a few days ago. The bombastic declarations of the High Commissioner in his taking the office, about his commitment to impartiality and independence in his activities, cost nothing. If the situation prevails, it will lead to the loss of trust by the international community to the Institute of the High Commissioner and his office, and this, in its turn, weaken the international human rights cooperation. The activities of the High Commissioner should encourage dialogue and cooperation, tangible help, rather than fanning mistrust and confrontation. The situation in Moldova, we are concerned about it, especially with what is happening in Gagauzia as part of the Moldova Republic. Recently, the Moldovan authorities are trying to remove the status of autonomy. As you know, on the 25th of March, on the far-fetched pretext, its head, Evgenia Gutsul, was detained, and she is currently under home arrest. 3 days ago, on the 14th of April, the Constitutional Court of Moldavia recognized, as they said, unconstitutional Article 21 of the law on the special status of Gagauzia. And when it was adopted in 1994. It legitimized the right of the parliament to appoint the Prosecutor General of the autonomy. Now, his candidacy can be adopted by the Supreme Council of Prosecutor General in Moldova and the Prosecutor General in Chisinau. This is a politically motivated decision and was made in secret. And Comrade was not informed in advance on the upcoming meeting on this sensitive issue. Can you imagine? Another example of such Chisinau's concern about the Gagauzians was introduced of skyrocketing fines introduced on the 10th of April for receiving social benefits via Russian Pромsvязьбанк. All this hypocrisy was shown that by all those who introduced the practice live at the grants and funds of the West, and de facto are the citizens of other states. Insinuations of some certain officials in Chisinau explicitly show to level all dissident parts of Moldavia, along with Gagauzia, leaving autonomy, or just the elements of autonomy, just in culture. We won't be surprised if another step of the Moldovan administration would be restriction of electoral rights of Gagauzia, whom currently can organize municipal elections. Maybe there will be a kind of record. 90 years ago, the same ideologists introduced in Western Europe special indications for the people of the second sort. For example, there were the yellow stars of the Jews. People were squeezed down to ghettos. And you know what happened after. Then there was gas cameras instead of ghettos. And that will be the further evolvements in Moldova by the administration of Moldova. We strongly condemn these totalitarian tools of the Moldovan authorities in Gagauzia, and we call on all the relevant international structures to the flagrant violation of human rights and national minorities and make Chisinau stop stifling the Gagauzian people. And all this happening in the heart of the European continent, in the part which is under protection of the Western public figures who allegedly concerned about human rights. And Estonia, on the 14th of April, Estonia adopted amendments to the law according to which the local navy are entitled to use force against foreign vessels. They can, and I quote, intercept, redirect, or other way force civilian vessels to change their direction and, if needed, to drown them. This mandate covers the maritime zone of Estonia, which includes internal waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zone of the country, which, according to international law, is not the territory of the littoral state. Russia strongly condemns these de facto, and let us call the things what they are, pirate ventures, because all the authority entitled to the Navy of Estonia fall beyond the international law according to the Maritime Convention 1982, which is a universal one. We see malicious decision of Thailand, which violates the letter and the spirit of international law. If such actions will be targeted against the Russian vessels, we would respond in proportion to the threats and risks coming from Estonia as a NATO state. The Russian side underlies that the Baltic Sea is the common maritime zone for all littoral states. We expect that all the countries who in actions rather than in words honor international law give an impartial assessment of provocative decision of Thailand, who puts navigation and the overall security in the Baltic region at risk. And yet from another atrocities and events in Estonia. Estonia introduced and amended constitutions in order to deprive those who live permanently in Estonia of the right to vote at municipal elections. And no one there reminds of the people there who are working in the factories, pay taxes, bring valuable contribution to the well-being of the country, who implement all their civic duties in good faith. And for this, they are deprived of their right so that they belong to another ethnicity because they are Russians. And this is racism, which is being transformed into neo-Nazism. Behind this discriminative initiative is the aspiration of the local Russophobes not to deprive the considerate part of the Russian-speaking citizens of Estonia of their legitimate rights. The criticism of the authors of the constitutions, Union of Lawyers of Estonia, the mayors of Tallinn and Narva, where the main part of the Russian-speaking population of this country lives, was left unnoticed. There was an order, there was a plan to pursue the Russophobia, and they pursue this plan. With its another malicious step, the Estonian authorities violate all relevant international obligations and human rights, including adopted voluntarily under the United Nations and the OSCE. We will seek the international responsible strongly condemn this racist venture. On the 9th of April, Vienna held the inauguration of BRICS on the basis of UNIDO. The Deputy Minister of Trade and Ministry participate in this meeting, as well as the Director General, Gerd Müller. BRICS representatives also participated in this. This initiative was made by Russia and supported by all the members of the association. It was reflected in the Kazan Declaration of the BRICS Summit in 2024. This center will become a venue for selection and introduction of promising technologies and best practices and increasing human capacity in industry. Its tasks include international technological cooperation, search for partners, exchange of practices, rapprochement of standards, support of small and medium companies that is fully in line with the UNIDO. We expect that the work of the center shall increase interaction among the UNIDO member states and raise additional funds to help practically all the interested states. And by the way, there was a whole topic dedicated to how the West treats its human rights obligations. On the 11th of April, the Finnish Parliament adopted the law, introduces the law to buy the property, and I quote, violate territorial integrity, the sovereignty and independence of other states, and jeopardizes national security of Finland, and can inadequately use their citizens to the damage of the citizens of Finland. Maybe you know this famous children film for children. How he is called? We can call Washington as a Biden city. Maybe these are Biden's ancestors, or Presidents Bush Jr., who violate territorial integrity. Maybe it's Clinton, under whom many things were done in order to violate territorial integrity. For example, Serbia can tell a lot about this. Whom are you describing? And this is a question to the Finnish parliament. In fact, despite some evidence and evident characteristics by the Finnish citizens who were rolled in this venture, despite all the similarity of these characteristics that are compared to NATO, it's not being done. I'm talking about the list of those who threaten security of this country, and I would like to suggest them to start from the NATO states. Of course, our country and our citizens in this document are not listed, but we are all aware that amid this frenziness, anti-Russia frenziness, whom they are talking about.
I think it's obvious to everyone that the officers of the conflict are not shying away from segregation, discrimination, and many tried to ask the question in Finland when the law was being reviewed. There have been many contradictions, inconsistencies, discussions from the part of human rights organizations in Finland. Nothing came out of it. Nothing was taken into account. The complete absolute ignoring of the baselessness of those accusations regarding to some part of Indian citizens. Nothing could stop them from adopting this heinous document. They are pursuing an absurd but clearly desirable goal for them to damage the bilateral relations between our countries, to harm our citizens. For those lawmakers in Finland who have been indoctrinated by this Russophobia, it is paramount to support this approach, and this approach is being supported by some part of the Finnish elite. Once again, all those oppositions presented during the review of the document were stated by the Finnish nationals, and nobody listened to them, but we will take into account all those steps by the official Helsinki. Now also on one topic that unfortunately is quite permanent. During the 221st session of the Executive Council of the UNESCO, we heard the topic of protection of journalists and how the organization has been acting, or rather enacting. As you remember, we have been repeatedly stating our desire to petition the Executive Director of UNESCO, Madame Azoulay, to conduct her mandate as prescribed. A serious problem. There have been serious problems or some in this behavior, and has been pointed out by many countries. The debate surrounding this point of agenda has clearly demonstrated that there have been some contradictions between the delegations at the UNESCO regarding ensuring the security of journalists is clearly noticeable against the backdrop of the recent report by Madame Zelensky, where there was no place. I think they tried to save paper to mention the Russian journalists and staff of the Russian media who died as a result of actions of the Kiev regime from 2022 to 2023. And many are justly asking why there haven't been any changes since then. And the main claims, the main accusations of those presenting the statements, primarily from the countries of the world majority at the UNESCO, touched upon the intransparent methodologies regarding the collection of data regarding those journalists who have perished, and the priority is still given to the data and opinions emanating from the Western NGOs. And you clearly understand you cannot expect any objective data from those NGOs. And this data should be, perhaps, collected from among the member states of UNESCO. Of course, and NGOs can take part in this process, sure, but primarily information should be provided officially by the member states and not through some paid-for and clearly politically motivated NGOs such as USAID, which has been notorious in paying for fabricated reports by NGOs. To protect this methodology, which is baseless and is not supported by the majority of countries, it's clear that Russia is standing against this this biased approach of Madame Zelensky, and which previously there was a clear call to condemn any crimes against media personnel. There needs to be a data bank on all information regarding those journalists who have perished as a result of unlawful actions. Also, we are clearly rejecting this methodology used by UNESCO, and this discrepancy, perhaps some opposition regarding the Executive Council deliberations, resulted in that the document in support of protection of journalists was not adopted through consensus but through voting. And this also testifies to the fact that the conscious politicization and even Ukrainization of the activity of this organization and its secretariat, and personally by the Director General, leads to the undermining of the mechanisms of this platform and harms the unity and authority of these organizations and poisons the atmosphere of dialogue on commonly valuable and not privatized issues and challenges of a global agenda. We hope that the future leadership of UNESCO, who will succeed the current leadership that has clearly disgraced itself, will lead their actions according to the principles of unbiasedness, as should be expected from a UNESCO official. We are always informing you on the activities on the Second World War and the heroes of the Red Army and the most important battles, on the attempts of the Russophobes to tarnish the memory of Red Army, on the vandalism against the memorials, burial grounds in Europe, etc. Perhaps there could be an impression that perhaps some have this impression that Ukraine has already joined the European Union, but only this impression only true for the specific type of EU, the so-called brown EU, the EU of revanchists, of desecrators of graves, of revisionists, the glorifiers of the Third Reich, those who glorified the bloody executioners who destroyed, who killed millions of civilians in Europe. Perhaps this is the real European Union, and the Kiev regime has really joined this organization, so to say. We remember of millions of our compatriots who have died, And in a couple of days, on 19th of April, we will have a day of joint action in memory of genocide of the Soviet people by Nazis and their collaborators during the Great Patriotic War. The events will be organized in schools, universities, scientific and cultural establishment, regional and the municipal establishment. Every year the number of participants is growing, and this reflects the importance of this topic for our people. This day was not chosen randomly. On 19th of April 1943, the executive order of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR number 39 was issued on the measures of punishment for the German fascists perpetrators culpable of murder and torture of Soviet civilian population and captured Red Army servicemen, and for spies, traitors to the motherland from a number of Soviet citizens and their collaborators. The appearance of this document has become one of the first steps in recognizing that the Nazis have led a deliberate and well-spread campaign to destroy the peaceful population of the occupied territory, and that those actions should be punished. We have started a program called Without Statute of Limitations since 2021. We are informing. During this project, we are informing the populace in cooperation with the National Center of Historical Memory. We are working with the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation to solidify the crimes of the fascist invaders during the Great Patriotic War as an act of genocide against the peoples of the Soviet Union. We need to apply significant efforts to continue this work in the current circumstances of our opposition to the West, but our like-minded individuals support us in that action. The Russian-initiated statements of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the CSTO countries on the 75th anniversary of the verdict of the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, it is underlined that the facts of expulsion and extermination by Nazis and the collaborators against the peaceful population of the USSR that have been delineated in the verdict should be evaluated as a genocide of the people of the Soviet Union. The similar statement was included in the final statement of the heads of the CIS countries on the occasion of the 13th year anniversary of the CIS. All those statements were sent as official documents to the ANGA. We pay priority attention to the further promotion and concretization of provisions contained within those documents. In 2023, the State Duma of the Russian Federation adopted a decision on the genocide of the peoples of the Soviet Union by Germany and its accomplices during the Great Patriotic War 1941-1945. On the 6th of April, the Federation Council approved the federal law on the commemoration of the memory of the victims of genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War 1941-1945 and accepted and issued an statement towards the foreign parliaments of foreign states and the people of the world on the inadmissibility of falsifying the history of the Second World War and the rehabilitation of Nazism. For us, it's of paramount importance to have the recognition that the crimes committed by the Hitlerites at the territory of the Soviet Union during the Second World War could be recognized as the genocide against people of the USSR. We are conducting joint work with the CIS, international platforms. There has been a call to the peoples of the countries of the CIS and the world community on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Second World War. And the document states that the facts of expulsions and extermination of the peaceful population, according to the verdict of the Nuremberg Tribunal, should be evaluated as genocide of the people of the Soviet Union. This thesis has been converted in the CSTO declaration. We are working on to ensure that all the facts detected by the investigative committee and admitted by the court instances could be spread to the awareness of the world community in their full volume in the name of the international truth. In 1975, it's been a tragic date of the history of Cambodia. On the 17th of April of that year, the armed detachments of the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh. After this, Pol Pot and his partisans started to build the so-called Democratic Kampuchea. At the end of April, 3.5 million city dwellers were forcibly relocated to rural regions where they were forced to clear jungles for new fields, build new irrigational facilities, and all those who didn't match the new political system was destroyed and exterminated. The old authorities, the national bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia, the clergymen, and Buddhist monks were exterminated. There was genocide against the national minorities, Vietnamese, and the Muslim minority of Chama. There have been mass executions, starvation, and complete lack of medical aid, and all those, according to the international evaluations, led to the deaths of around 2 million people. After the fall of the regime of Pol Pot in 1979, his partisans, who have continued to dwell in the refugee camps in Thailand, received attention from Washington and its allies and received financial and material aid, but also they received diplomatic support, which led to the fact that up until 1982, the Pol Pot partisans occupied the Cambodian place at the UN. After the fact, for many years, this place was delegated to the so-called coalition government of the Democratic Kampuchea, with the Khmer Rouge still playing a leading role. There's also an 80th anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the USSR and the Republic of Guatemala in 1945. This is a large, of course, this is a large amount of time, but the contacts between the countries started much earlier than that. Even in 1880, the Russian Emperor Alexander II and the Guatemalan President Justo Rufino Barrios Avion exchanged messages, which laid the foundation of our bilateral links. This became a stamp that could allow us to form the ties of friendship and mutual understanding and lay the foundation for multifaceted cooperation. We think that we need to continue this trend and try to increase it. We confirm our intention to develop a constructive political dialogue with Guatemala to extend the normative legal base of bilateral relations and diversification of trade, culture, links between our countries based on pragmatism, mutual respect, and equal rights. We congratulate our Guatemalan colleagues and friends with this solemn date. One more announcement to make is from May 17 to 24. There will be a 47th International Moscow Film Festival happening with participation of 57 countries. There have been 1,600 applications. Everyone understands that the International Moscow Film Festival is a worldwide event, but the number of applications exceeded the previous year by 17%. This testifies to the growing interest towards this event from among the cinematographers all around the world. The majority of applications arrive from Russia, China, Spain, France, and Iran. The program demonstrates a broad spectrum of topics that are of concern to humanity. One of the most important topics is the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. This was reflected in different programs of this festival. The festival will be opened by the military movie His Name Was Not on the List by Sergei Korotayev, together with Vladimir Mashkov, Vladislav Miller, and Alena Morillo in the leading roles. This is a historical drama on the valor, faith, and the love for the motherland, which is made after the novel by Boris Vasilyev with the same name. The International Moscow Film Festival helps establish cooperation between cinematographers all around the world and popularize the creative achievements of the Russian and foreign cinematography and further understanding of the cultural ties and between our relations between our countries. Also, on 19th of April, we celebrate the 180th anniversary since the birth of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Empire, the Count Mikhail Muravyov. The brilliant diplomatic career of Mr. Muravyov began in May 1864, when he was appointed junior secretary within the Russian mission at Berlin. For the next 30 years, he worked in Stockholm, Stuttgart, The Hague, and Paris. At the beginning of the Russian-Turkish War in 1877-1878, the young diplomat was in the war theater, and he was one of the officers of the Red Cross. And according to the commanding officers, he reflected, he acted with the utmost respect. And since 1893 to 1897, he was ambassador plenipotentiary extraordinary in Copenhagen. On January 1st, 1987, Nicholas II appointed him as the manager of the Foreign Policy Agency, and 3 months later he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. The period from 1897 through 1900 was reached with events of huge international importance. In 1998, the Russian MFA came up with the initiative to call a conference to decrease the amount of armaments in Europe. There was attempts to improve the direct contacts with Afghanistan, to reinforce Russian positions in Iran, in Turkey. He also helped increase our ties with France during his visit in 1987. I will give a direct quote from the document that was presented to Nicholas II. There was a very detailed report to His Highness the Emperor Nicholas II, submitted by Muravyov, and the Emperor made a written remark, that he read the report with huge pleasure. It was underlined that the negotiations of Muravyov in the French capital were successful and helped to reinforce the mutual understanding of both countries regarding the deterrence of Germany and the UK on the European continent. Mr. Muravyov also was one of the main initiators of the Russian-Chinese Convention of 1897 regarding the rent of the Port Arthur and the Liaotung Peninsula base. The agreement, there was also agreement between Russia and China regarding the railway construction in Manchuria and outside Mongolia, and also regarding the Chinese Eastern Railway towards Beijing. In 1897, we extended our links with other countries. There was official embassy to Abyssinia. The mission in Washington was transformed into an embassy. New consulates were opened in Iran and Morocco. Mr. Muravyov suddenly died on June 21st, 1900 in St. Petersburg. In the MFA documents of that time, it was pointed out that the sudden death of the minister caused deep concern and the true deploration. And this 3-year period of him presiding over the ministry was very important for the history of our country.
On the 22nd, April, there will be held the first forum of young diplomats Russia-Africa. This event will bring together young diplomats from Russia and Africa to discuss the relevant issues of international cooperation. This forum will become yet another example of the concept of horizontal diplomacy implemented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in order to develop the network of the platforms of informal communication between young diplomats. The main topic is the diplomacy of victory, dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War. This meeting will invite foreign ministers of foreign affairs and other young people between 25 and 40 years responsible for international cooperation, economic, political, cultural, and humanitarian areas, as well as responsible for the development of our relations in the areas. The forum will comprise the participation of 60 diplomats from 40 states. The delegates will be prepared with an intense program, as well as events to fight neocolonialism, cultural and humanitarian cooperation between Russia and Africa, and sports diplomacy. The last day of forum will be, on the last day, there will be the adoption of the new members of the International Association of Young Diplomats, established upon the initiative of the Council of Young Diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2017 in order to strengthen cooperation between young experts. And it comprises about 200 diplomats now. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Is International Life with us? Good afternoon. Recently, we've got information that in Germany and France, they can be reconsidered partial return to buying the international gas from Russia. And this is amid deteriorating relations with Washington. But nevertheless, there are fears that Washington can use these LNG supplies as a trump card in its trade negotiations. What are the prospects, in your opinion, to resume cooperation between the Russian Federation and EU in the energy area? Of course, this topic is being discussed a lot, but as you know, we need to assess the policy of EU building on the specific facts. And these are steps of the EU politicists. Let us talk about what is really happening. Brussels, for many years, is engaged as an unreliable partner in energy. And if you remember, just before coup d'etat in 2014, the European Union decided to infringe the Russia's interests as the main supplier of energy resources. Let us refresh our memory. Through adopting this discriminatory law, the so-called third energy package, and introduced illegitimate unilateral sanctions that directly affected our fuel and energy infrastructure. And this is just one example. Over the recent years, there have been many prime ministers and many declarations and mechanisms and associations and other officials, anti-Russia gatherings and numerous accusations of Russia, which rendered support, energy support to Europe. Back then they agreed to supply weapons. We've heard a lot. But this is a illogical end of this. No one bothered to hold at least any investigation. Some countries withdrew from this investigation process, but Germany remains in it, but utters no word about this. But when Russia suggested holding under the aegis of the UN Secretary General to hold the investigation, the West banned such proposals. So in this regard, in the same line is the ignorance of the attacks of Ukraine on the Russian energy facilities during the agreed ceasefire. These are just facts, and we need to be guided by them. This is the reflection, not just the sentiments, but the root causes that govern in the Brussels bureaucracy. There is a sense that they will continue to increase their efforts and pressure on the EU members who expect Russian energy supplies. They want the damage themselves, but want to damage all those who refuse to participate in this venture. And in this context, the European Commission prepares the roadmap to implement the policy of full denial from Russia energy. There were many documents written in this regard. I think it's about the measures affecting the supplies of pipe and liquefied gas from Russia, and they harm themselves. Of course, it's quite obvious recently The European Commission representative Anna-Kaisa Seitkinen in Brussels at her briefing said that the European Union is ready to hold talks with the US and other partners in order to replace the Russian gas. This is yet another example. And these statements are not refuted. So we need to follow what we have. I think Russia has always been a reliable supplier of energy resources. Our cooperation with some European countries continues, and we can reconsider various options for energy interaction with some certain states, of course, with due account of our economic interests. As our minister said, as soon as they calm down and reconsider their ideology, maybe then we can reflect on this issue from the other perspective. Right now, we need to build on the things we have. And there are no indications that the current leaders of the EU will reconsider their position as for denial of the Russian energy resources, which lead to stagnation of the European economy and a dramatic drawdown in the level of incomes and living standards. We don't see such indications right now. As for Germany, I think it's one of the striking examples how the government managed to act against its own people amid the initiative and full refusal announced by Olaf Scholz to deny and to refuse the Russian energy. No response to the blow of the Nord Stream ill-thought closure under pretext of environmental concerns of nuclear power stations and under influence of the new round of transatlantic trade wars. A once prosperous German economy undergoes a complicated situation. Business community is leaving, it's registering in other states. There are fears of what is happening in their country. Amid this backdrop, when a year ago German journalists came to Russia to clarify whether Russia can resume supplies on the part of a Nord Stream that was not exploded, and obtained an affirmative answer, even with a time frame when we can do it, the German government warned them even to close this mass media. When someone from the mass media politicians uttered the word about resumption of energy supplies from Russia, when and if in the future this was put under pressure and labeled as Russophobia and so on and so forth. But the result is very visible. Is Lenta.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions. Recently, the Deputy Minister, Mikhail Gauzin, said on this readiness to resume negotiations with Georgia. Is there any progress in this issue? And what are practical steps from Tbilisi that Moscow is waiting for? As you know, I believe that first and foremost we need to see this interview, Mr. Galuzin, and he looks into it But I can say that our ministry and our representatives reiterated on numerous occasions that diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia were interrupted, as you know, not by Russia, but by Saakashvili's regime after aggression against the citizens of South Ossetia, against Russian peacekeepers and our citizens. Now, Saakashvili's regime, exactly for these things, is being harshly criticized by the public. Mr. Saakashvili is in court right now, as you know, under persecutions, but his legacy, unfortunately, remains. Last autumn, during the electoral campaign, there were some sensible and promising declarations and statements made on the need to apologize before the people of South Ossetia, apologies and promises to gain reconciliation. There is such an intent among the Georgian politicians with regard to Abkhazia. We see them as a positive example so that the relations between Georgia and South Ossetia can normalize on the basis of a deep understanding of the current realities. We are ready to comprehensively develop full-scale interactions with Georgia, and we have a great potential for that. And Georgia remains one of the key markets on many areas, for example, in wine industry, in fruit. On the other hand, Russia is a leading supplier of energy and grains to Georgia. Both our countries share a common history, culture, religion, humanitarian ties, all just this human dimension. The current leaders, understanding these close ties between our peoples, some special emotions that we share to each other, and with understanding of the need to develop a mutually beneficial relation for the benefit of two peoples. As you know, the Russian Federation, with due account of this, has recently decided to make practical steps to restore aviation between Russia and Georgia. The Georgian citizens received a visa-free regime. As for the diplomatic relations, we have to do with the terrible legacy of the man who was called as a criminal in his own country. In terms of law, not to mention about the moral aspect. The same characteristics was given to him by international institutions who investigated into the 2008 events. When it comes to the diplomatic relations, we can restore them. We can go as far as the Georgian side is ready. We have no restrictions, and we call on everyone to carefully analyze the statements and the interview made by the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Galuzin. And we will see the link in the text of the briefing. And I was quoting very close to the text. And my second question. The High Representative of the EU on Foreign Affairs and Political and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, warned the candidates from the European Union to go to Moscow on the 9th of May, and Zelensky invited the leaders of Europe to come to Kiev on this day. How can these statements influence the commemoration of these events in Russia? And who can we wait from the European leaders on the 9th of May and the day of victory? You know, their friendliness impacts themselves because they can be ridiculed at, and they are ready to do so, in terms of reincarnation of the past of their countries, so that to assert themselves at the current positions that builds upon Russophobia, anti-Russia phobias, their complicity in neoliberal values, and the overwhelming majority, the countries who were just in the recent past their colonies, the countries that obtained their statehood not long ago in terms of history, ridicule at all those who call themselves as a beautiful garden, because everyone knows the Second World War and the rule about Soviet soldiers and the USSR, the role of the Red Army and its soldiers in the victory over Nazism. And the global majority looks at it with a certain outrage on all those who pursue the values of neo-Nazis and Nazists, who glorify the criminals, the crimes committed by their ancestors, in order to distort the history. And that's the first point. Secondly, this frenziness is characteristic of, is disastrous to them themselves. The second point, we have our own vision on how to hold events in commemoration of the 80th anniversary. And I talked about initiatives today. We have like-minded states. We have tasks and objectives to restore the historical memory and to preserve it. Of course, we shall continue to eliminate the fake news, to reveal them, do whatever we can, so that to provide the maximum information. You know how archives are being revealed, how our ministry releases the reports that were known made publicly available on the fake events of that times. We have a lot of notebooks, films, documentaries that are being filmed or even restored, taking into account this video footage of that times. You can see all these novels in relation that describing that times. You know, this intention paid by the public organizations in our country to the veteran associations or the captives of the camps of concentration camps, and you know that the support of the state, because that's another important aspect to preserve the historical memory. We can see how our education, school education, preschool education, higher education, reveals its doors and programs so that history can finally take a decent place despite some other areas
of high use and great use, but history is being promoted in other directions. Perhaps if you push history aside, you